Nintendo just dropped their most recent Nintendo Direct, highlighting some of their upcoming releases from the first half of 2023. From remasters to DLC to information regarding some of their most anticipated releases, many might assume that this was a successful showcase, right? Well, not exactly. So when you look at Nintendo's track record as of late, it can be argued that this was probably one of their most prominent Nintendo Directs in a while. However, much of the information on the internet has not been about the Metroid Prime remaster, the Game Boy Advance games that are releasing soon, or some of the awesome games coming to Nintendo eShop. Most of the conversation has been about the Breath of the Wild sequel and the $70 price tag associated with it. Now, this is a trend that Sony started way back when and trickled down through the industry one major company at a time. It wasn't too long before Microsoft hopped on the train, but I think many are confused and disappointed that Nintendo has also followed suit. In their defense, they say that this is a case-by-case basis. However, we all know what that means. It basically means that most of their first-party games in the future will be $70. And if you think Zelda is getting away with an expensive price tag and they're going to sell Mario for $60, you're crazy. This is just the beginning. Now let's talk about some of the issues relating to this and the bigger story at large. The issue here lies in the fact that most of Nintendo's games do not go on sale. And if they do, it typically takes years. If we look at Breath of the Wild, that game spent a long time on shelves at a solid $60 before it ever went on sale. And even then, it dropped at maybe $10. Now, unlike PlayStation and Xbox, Nintendo knows what they're doing. They know that no matter what, you're gonna buy their games. So that's why a $70 price tag doesn't necessarily feel like a necessity for Nintendo as much as it feels like just kind of a power dynamic. In my mind, it feels like Nintendo is saying, hey, we know that this is a game that you've been waiting for. Our competitors, or quote unquote competitors, are selling their games at $70. We should be able to do that too. And so you look at Sony and everyone wants to blame Sony for it, but Microsoft is also doing the same thing. Now, when you look at Nintendo, they're like, oh, it's not so bad. It's kind of something that people should be used to by now. We're not going to do every game at $70, but for our biggest games, the games that we know you will buy, like Mario, probably if they ever make a Mario Kart game, that will probably be $70. If they ever make a new Zelda game after this, that will also probably be $70. It's just kind of seeing how far they can go with getting away with it. Now, the issue that I think a lot of people have with the Breath of the Wild sequel being $70 is a couple things. One, it wasn't something that was necessarily revealed. I don't remember seeing any sort of articles or announcements surrounding the fact that they say, hey, this is something that we have to do. I think when you want to look at Sony, you want to look at Microsoft, I think Xbox and PlayStation both gave announcements that said that, they were going to have to increase their prices for games. And I think for the most part, when we look at the games that have come out specifically for Sony, because I know Xbox hasn't put out anything, outside of Redfall's coming, that'll probably be $70, and Starfield. But outside of that, they haven't really put out anything that would warrant a $70 price tag, but they've warned people that it is coming. But when you look at Sony, for instance, Sony has came out and said before that they were going to have to increase their games to $70. It was just kind of inflation. It's just how things go. They're putting more effort. You got mocap, you got voice acting, you got a lot of other things that are going to creating these experiences in these games that just cost more. And I think outside of the price tag, when you look outside of it, I think when you look at games like God of War Ragnarok and you look at some of the other games that they've come out with, for the most part, you can justify a $70 price tag. It's not fun. Nobody wants to pay $70 for one game, but you can kind of understand it. But when you look at $70 price tag for such a game as Breath of the Wild 2 sequel, like I said, the issue comes in the fact that it wasn't something that was announced. It also comes in the fact that we've seen little to no gameplay for this game at all. How are people supposed to know or make the decision that this game is worth $70 when you won't show anything? So the question that's coming up when people talk about Breath of the Wild is not so much excitement anymore. It's the question of, is it worth $70? Which brings up the issue of why don't we know anything about this game? Now, when you look at the facts, Breath of the Wild 2 was supposed to come out, I believe, of November or December of last year. However, unfortunately, as it goes, this game was delayed, which is unfortunate, but it's kind of just par for the course. It's how things go. But given the fact that we're 3 months out now from the release of this game, and as far as we know, that release date is not changing, why have we not seen a single ounce of actual gameplay? The only information that they've shown in any of the directs, the last 3 directs that they've done or so, that featured Breath of the Wild 2, has been nothing more than a form of a trailer. Now, each trailer, I will, in their defense, say that each trailer that they had provided has given us a little bit more, and a little bit more, and a little bit more in terms of the plot. Link's the hero, Zelda's in trouble, Ganon is angry, and you're in an open world. But outside of that, that's about it. I think this third trailer that we got, the one that we got this week with the most recent Nintendo Direct, may have given us a little bit more information regarding travel, how we'll go, and go about moving around the world, whether that be on horseback, whether that be on like these little motorcycle, bike cars or whatever, or some sort of aerial flying vehicle. Outside of that, there hasn't really been much in terms of what you will be doing in the game. How is this different than Breath of the Wild? Is it more or less the same? Because if we look at it graphically, Breath of the Wild 2 looks nothing more than Breath of the Wild 1.5, if we're being completely honest, unless you actively show people how it's different, how it's better, how it's improved. And I will say that when you start to throw a $70 price tag at games, people understandably become much more critical before making a purchase, which means that where people may have just bought a game out of pure faith before, they're much less likely to do that now, because if they get the game and it's not what they like, they it kind of sends the signal that they got scammed a little bit. You know what I mean? I think that's why it's so important to provide information as much as you can without spoiling the experience for the player. It's why gameplay is so important, because it allows people to look at the game and say, based on what we saw, is this something that I would want to play? And trailers just don't do enough of that. Trailers have always been about showcasing the best moments of the game that give you a little bit of information as to what you can expect, right? I think the trailers have done a great job of showcasing the vibe of the game, but it's really, like I said, nothing more than Breath of the Wild 1.5. It doesn't feel to me like it's a new game. It's a brand new experience to one of their most successful games of all time. And I think that's where the problem really starts to lie. And so when I look at it, and I think when a lot of people look at it, that's what's the most shocking to people. That's what's the most surprising. It's the fact that we've gotten 3 trailers since this game was announced, possibly 2 years ago. We've gotten 3 trailers and not a single ounce of a gameplay reveal showcasing what you'll be doing, how you'll move around the world. Is weapon crafting a thing? Or is weapon deprecation going to be a thing? Are we going to be breaking our weapons again? How will we go about the world? You know what I mean? So many questions that we potentially have that still aren't being answered for a game that you now want people to pay $70 for. The question still remains, is it even worth it? And as I said before, when you start to add $70 price tag to these games, I think people have more than a right to ask those kinds of questions, to make those kinds of assumptions, to make the decision as to whether or not they want to spend $70 on this game. Another area that I want to touch on briefly is the harsh reality that the Switch faces. Now, when it comes to comparing 3 major consoles, we look at Sony, we look at Xbox, there is no denying that Sony has had a reason to raise prices. And maybe we can even make the justification that Xbox has a reason to improve prices based on the performance and the scope and this, of their potential games that are coming out. Now, I'm talking level design, I'm talking graphics, I'm talking value. The games that I've purchased in the past left me thinking, okay, I can see why this game was more expensive. And while I don't want to pay $70 for a game, as I'm sure most of us don't, I have played these experiences and I've said, you know what? I can see why this was $70. I'm talking to you, God of War Ragnarok. My point is that a game being expensive has to offer more to justify the purchase, or else it looks and feels like nothing more than a cash grab. And if I'm being completely honest, the trailers that have been shown for Breath of the Wild have not convinced me at all that this game is worth the higher price tag. If anything, it looks nothing more like Breath of the Wild 1.5. Now, people have been asking for this for a while. They've been asking for improved hardware, and what we ended up getting was nothing more than an LED screen to make things appear a little bit brighter. However, what people really want and what I think the Switch really needs is improved hardware. It needs something to run games better, run games faster. And I think that became evidently apparent when the most recent Pokemon game came out and it was having stuttering issues. It was having frame rate issues. It was running at 30 FPS. And I think when you look at it now, it may sound a little elitist to say this, but in 2023, games should not be running at 30 FPS if they're being charged $60, $70 for them. So whether we want to admit it or not, the first thing that gets us to know if we want to buy a game or if we're interested at all is the looks. So yes, graphics do matter. And when I looked at Breath of the Wild 2, out of all the trailers that we've seen, I simply wasn't impressed. Again, it doesn't mean that I'm not interested in the game, but for $70, Nintendo has to show something about the quality of the game that convinces you that it is worth that higher price tag. And the trailers simply haven't sold me on that. Again, I don't mind paying higher prices, but if you're going to ask people to shell out that cash, you better be damn sure that you have given them a reason to give you that money. So far, Breath of the Wild has not given us anything more than a couple minute trailers to get us excited, to build up the hype, to say that the game is coming. But that's not enough anymore. For $70, people need proof. They need evidential proof that says that, hey, this is $70. It's more expensive than the other games, but it's worth it. This is going to push the system to its limits and provides a next-gen experience that is well worth the higher price tag. And as I said before, Breath of the Wild 2 and the Switch in general just continues to feel more dated to me. It feels like, I think that this is, without getting on a tangent, I think that this is something that I noticed in the most recent Nintendo Direct that has continued to stick with me, is the fact that it feels like Nintendo does a great job of reaching into the past, reaching into the vault, bringing out some of these older games that they can charge you again for. And I think that that's great. Nintendo does a great job at feeding nostalgia, right? You can play these Game Boy games, you can play these Game Boy Advance games, but at the end of the day, when you really look at it, they don't do a great job, and haven't since the Switch really came out, of looking into the future and saying, hey, this is something that, it's a future experience. It's a new Mario Kart. It's a new Mario game that we know you want, and we're going to give you that. So far, Breath of the Wild 2 visually or gameplay wise has not brought a lot to the table. Thus lies the confusion and somewhat outrage over the increased $70. It's totally cool to keep things under wrap, and we know that that's kind of Nintendo's MO. It's kind of what they've done since the dawn of time. They don't really give a lot of information when it comes to their games. However, at some point, you got to give people something. Nintendo has to eventually come up with something and give people a reason to buy these games, that if they're going to increase the prices. And by eventually, I mean yesterday. So I'm still holding out hope that they'll eventually do a direct, and by eventually, I mean yesterday, for Breath of the Wild 2 with at least 20 minutes of gameplay that highlights and gives people a reason to pre-order. But I also know who I'm talking about, and I know that Nintendo's probably not going to do that. And I think that if they are going to do that, they really only have March. I don't feel like if they released an information or gameplay reveal in April, me personally, I feel like that's a tad too late. But again, it's Nintendo, they'll do what they want. But let me know what you guys think down in the comment section below. Do you think that it's fair that Nintendo is raising their prices for some of their games? Is it justified? Will you still be buying them regardless? Let me know down in the comment section below. As for me, I'm still very much baffled. Not only that the game is $70, I don't mind that. I understand inflation. I understand that that's just kind of how it goes sometimes, with these games. However, I feel like it's weird that Nintendo's doing it, given the little information that we have for Breath of the Wild 2, and the fact that most of the Switch games just feel old, in my opinion. It's not to say that they're not fun and they're not good experiences, but in terms of visually feeling like you're playing a next-gen console, the Switch has never really done that for me. It feeds my nostalgia. When we talk about Breath of the Wild 2, my only question is, Nintendo, what are we waiting for? What's taking so long? The game is 3 months now. It's one of your biggest releases to date. You would hope that they would give us something. But again, I digress. That's all I'm going to say about that. The game released in less than 3 months, and not a single ounce of information regarding exploration, combat, or anything has been released, and that confuses me. I'm hoping that by March at the least, we'll get new information, or maybe another direct highlighting Breath of the Wild 2, but I guess we're just going to have to wait and see. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching. My name is That Guy Rye. Drop a like on this video if you do enjoy, and I will see you in the next one.